Hello and welcome back to the FordTechMakuloco channel. Today we're going to start our 4-part series on timing the Ford 4.0 liter SOHC engine. Now this engine's using the Ford Mustang, the Explorer, the Ranger, just to name a few. I'm sure I'm missing a few in there. And it's a good little engine. It's torquey. It does suck the fuel though. But in general, it's a good little engine, except for the timing components on these, which seems to be a common theme among all Ford engines. Now, the problem with this one is that the timing cassettes in both the front and the rear, yes, I said the front and the rear of the engine, tend to break. And once the one in the rear breaks and has any kind of damage to it and you need to replace it, you must pull the engine. The other option is pulling the transmission, but I like to pull the engine out because mainly I find the bed plate is leaking on these engines, and also the rear main seal is leaking, and the tensioner for the balance shaft deep down in the bed plate is also broken more often than not. So you want to go ahead and just yank the engine out and start pulling stuff apart, make it like new once again. So we're going to start a 4-part series today. We're going to start with pulling the engine, general tips and tricks on how to do that and get it onto the engine stand, then some tear down, and then actually building it back up with new timing components, and then of course putting all the covers back on, torquing them down, torque specs, all that good stuff. So it's a full featured repair series on the Ford 4.0 liter SOHC engine. Let's get to it.
Okay, now I do have a few tips on pulling the engine out of these. I've done quite a few. I've pulled a lot of engines in general. I know what works and makes it a lot easier. The very first thing you want to do is pull the hood off. Get it out of the way. It's going to be coming off either way to pull the engine up and out. So you might as well get it out of there, get some good light in here and some good access way back deep down inside of here. Pull off intake bolts, stuff like that. The next thing you want to do, of course, is make sure the engine's cool. And we can go ahead, usually on the passenger side, you see that nylon drain cock way down in there? That's your drain for the coolant. We can start draining the coolant into the pan, collecting it while we're starting to take everything else apart. Now, of course, you want to pull your negative battery cable and get that off and out of the way. Depending on your configuration, you may want to pull the battery tray and the battery and just get it out of here. The other tip I can give you is anything you're pulling off, especially in the EGR system on the Explorers is back there, like the nut right here, the jam nut, start spraying with the rust penetrant. Get them soaking now while we're pulling off all these little connectors and BS stuff, okay? Let them soak. Now wires, you're gonna want to mark all your wires. It's just simple things like this. It's gonna make going back together so much faster and less problems starting it back up. You can see the wire numbers that are down there. Guess what? Go ahead and mark the wires, especially over here. And if you're so inclined, down by the cylinders there, but definitely up here. And you can just take the whole bundle off and back together. Now, the rest of this is pretty darn simple. In almost all cases, you're going to have to discharge the AC system, so be ready for that. Maybe before the engine's down and out, you want to take it to a shop, have them recover it, so it's ready to go. And then besides that, everything on here is pretty darn basic, all this stuff just needs to come off, the front end drive stuff, the alternator, all these big brackets and stuff like that come off, and I'll give you updates as I get stuff off of here that's going to relate to you no matter if you have an Explorer or a Ranger or whatever, okay? And also we're pulling the engine up and out, and these have really easy engine mounts to get to. This kind of sit down, it's really easy to get the engine out here, but you want to get down in there, which, let me get my flashlight real quick. You want to get down in there, and you could probably see them right there. Right there. See those nuts right there? I know it's unfocused, but you want to start spraying them too, okay? All these different items, you can get them soaking while we're pulling all this BS stuff off. And by the time you get all these wires and connectors and all that stuff off, the cooling system hoses are going to be ready to come off because this will be fully drained. Okay, so it's a whole process here that's going on. Now, the one thing I can tell you is that, basic tools to get stuff off of here, right? Cleanliness is very important, so you want to use the air wand and just right now, just start blowing everything off, especially all these little crevices down by the intake, so we get nothing down into the engine. Also, trim tools like this, cat claw and the trim tool, will help with so many of these push retainers that Ford uses all over the place, so you can get them off without breaking. And even stuff like this, a lot of times these little vacuum lines like right here, they get dry rotted on there. You don't want to yank on them and tear them. You get underneath there, you kind of hook it and you pull it up and off of there, and there's no problem. So you can put everything back together and not break stuff. So those are my tips, general tips going forward, and then once this is all off of here, we can give you some more tips on pulling this thing out. All right, a few notes underneath the vehicle here. Of course, you want to drain the engine oil, get that draining, preferably an extended drain, so we can get as much out of the crankcase as possible in the lower pan area here, so it's cleaner for rebuilding. Also, when you're taking all the nuts off for the torque converter, one of them you want to mark with white paint, on the flex plate and on the stud, so you can match it up for balance. Always a good idea. And the rest of it's pretty basic, just like pulling any other engine out. You want to pull your nuts off for your exhaust so it separates from the manifolds, and then start going after your bell housing bolts all the way around, and leave the easy to get to ones, one on each side, until you're absolutely ready to pull the engine. But besides that, it's all pretty basic underneath here. Most of it's done from up top. And voila, it's ready to come out. As you can see, when I pull one of these engines, I like to get a lot of different components off of there to make it a lot easier to get up and out here without damaging anything, okay? You don't want to damage the components, and you don't want to damage the body around it when you're pulling it out. And it can be tight in different configurations. So I'll pull the intake, of course, but I'll also pull all the front end drive stuff off of here. We got to pull it off anyways on the stand in order to get in here in time over here especially. So I'll get all that stuff out of the way. It's pretty easy once all the front end stuff is out of here. But I'll leave like the water pump on, front cover, dampener, all that good stuff. It'll be just fine coming up and out of here. I'll even remove the radiator and condenser so it's out of here. No chance of damage when this thing's swinging back and forth and coming up and out of here, okay? You don't want to damage that. Also, up top here, now that the intake is off, it's much, much easier to get in here to these top bell housing bolts. You can do it all from up top here. Makes it a lot easier. Now, one note about the engine mounts on here, and this is going to make it very easy to get it up and out of here and separate from the trans, and then mating back to the trans, going back in, it's going to make it a lot easier too. Okay, here's the tip. Now down below here, okay, you have your engine mount right here, okay, and then there's a bracket where it goes to the engine, the side of the cylinder block, okay. Now the mount's going to stay in here. That's going to stay on both sides, and you're going to take off these 18mm nuts. That's a given. What the problem is that you're going to lift the engine with this bracket up enough to clear these to pull it forward to separate from the trans. Puts a lot of strain on the trans and the torque converter. You may damage it, or at least the input shaft seal. You don't want to do that. So what you want to do is take these nuts off. We're going to break torque on, let me get in here. There's three, there we go, three 13mm bolts right here that bolt this bracket to the side of the block. We're going to break torque on those while it's all in here. Then once the engine crane is holding the weight of the engine, lift up just enough, we're going to zip these out of here. And we're going to get this whole bracket out of here on both sides. And what it's going to allow us to do is lift the engine up a little bit or down a little bit, drop it down a little bit, depending on what we need to do to mate it properly to that transmission back there. It's going to make it so much easier if you just take that bracket out of here, okay? Now, all this stuff I did, all these things I took off to get it out of here, the one thing I left on was the fuel. You want to leave the fuel connection on until the very last minute, and then we'll use a quick disconnect tool, and 3/8 usually, and we'll pop that off of there. Of course, it may still be under pressure, so wrap a rag around it when you're disconnecting it, but that's the last thing you want to disconnect. You don't want to smell that, and you just don't want fuel dripping everywhere while you're doing this. So, let's go and rig up the sides so we can lift this thing up and out of here. All right, real quick before I pull the engine out, I want to go over in detail how I rig up the lifting chains and equalizer to the cylinder heads to lift this thing up and out of there without damaging anything, okay? Now the way that Ford wants you to do it is they want you to use these special lifting eyes and equalizer and then bolt it in right here to the cylinder heads. You see that bolt hole right there? We took those bolts out earlier for the heater core brackets. Well, there's one on each side. There's one here and one there. The problem with that is that your chains will actually put a lot of pressure on these plastic valve covers and may crack them as the pressure increases on them. So what I do in the same situation, you're still doing a diagonal type deal here, is I will attach it to the front of the cylinder head right here where all that webbing is at. Another great reason to remove all the accessory drive brackets right here so you can get access to these holes. Now this hole is actually very strong and it goes in very, very deep, so it's more than strong enough to hold up this little V6. And the same thing, of course, since these are flip-flopped, it's on the back side there. Look at that. Tons of room to get in there and bolt it up. Now what I do is I'll leave this chain length right here long, okay? Come up and over, and that'll allow my equalizer to come out away from the cowling so you don't damage anything. Then this side I'll level it out and I'll adjust the chain length so that's level lifting, and then of course you have the adjustment as needed going forward, okay? So once that's all together, what you want to do is put a little bit of tension on those chains. So start pumping your engine crane, put a little tension on it. Make sure everything's equal, okay? You can see you're picking up some weight of the engine off the frame, okay? And at this point, you're safe to go underneath there and remove those last two bell housing bolts so the trans and the engine are unbolted from each other, okay? And then what you're gonna do is you're gonna lift it a little bit more. You see it down there moving? And that way the weight is off of these brackets and you can get to those 3 bolts and get this bracket out of here. You want this bracket out of here. It's gonna make your life so much easier. Besides that, remember that fuel line, unclip that, we can start lifting up a little more, bring it forward, separate from the trans, and then up and out of here. All right, one last note before pulling the engine out. I totally forgot. Don't want to leave you guys astray. Is of course you want to use a jack and a piece of wood and support the transmission. Now you can do it right here on the front edge of the pan with a block of wood and distribute the weight, or if you have room and a jack stand or something like that, because you can see the exhaust is in the way, bell housing right there. So we're just going to raise it up just a little bit, and we can continue pulling the engine out. All right, here we go. Let's pull that engine out. Now the last thing we got to do is disconnect the fuel line from the manifold. So let's go ahead and do that, and we can start lifting it up and out of there. Not too bad of a job, pretty light. Get this disconnected real quick. Get our rag around it and get it separated. There we go. All right. Get our lights out of here. All right. So our transmission is supported down there. We're going to lift it enough. Brackets out of here. Now once it's up enough, a couple inches, you kind of want to shake it a little bit and bring it forward. It should fall right out like that. Because our engine is at the same height as the transmission, okay? Because those black brackets are out of there. Now look at it. It's just sitting there wobbling, okay? So pull it forward just a little bit and start lifting it. Same thing. A little more forward. And then start taking a look around and make sure we're fully disconnected from everything. Oil filters hitting on this side, no big deal.
You can just keep going up. Just slowly go up so you can watch. Make sure we're not connected somewhere. There it is. Comes right out, nice and light. Good to go back here. Push it back a little bit, actually. Watch the back there. Max this sucker out. Okay. Look at that, huh? That's freaking nuts. Okay, so we're good to go. Make sure you concentrate on this and clear the cowl here. And I prefer to lift it up and over and get it past over the front grille radiator support area. Okay, so you don't want to do any jerky movements. You want to be as smooth as possible, okay? Smooth as possible, smooth as possible. And swing this leg over so we clear the truck. Watch out. And then as soon as you clear the vehicle, you want to straighten it, make sure you're not going to hit the vehicle, and then slowly turn this sucker to lower it. And that way, we lower our center of gravity and reduce the chance of any kind of tipping while we're dragging it over to our final resting place here. Right about there is good. Watch the front of the vehicle. And there it is. Get you to turn down here. Pretty darn easy to pull one of these engines. There's not much to it. Everything usually comes apart, and then they're light coming up and out of there. So, next step is engine stand, cleanup, and disassembly.